I will give a full disclaimer. You probably will be very confused in this video if you do not previously watch session 1. So just go back on my channel, just look at the link, and it should be there. So look at that, and this will make a lot more sense. With that out of the way, I will get back to where we were beforehand. So I introduced the two school of thoughts, this being Greek and Egyptian. And now we're going to see kind of the history play out as we know it. Some civilizations come, some stronger than others, but then eventually the Roman Empire does dominate the entire Mediterranean as we know it, spanning from the rolling hills of Britannia to the deserts in Egypt. So, and if we were to look at the succession line in Rome, we would see a very interesting pattern play out. Their first governments were kings, similar to what we consider to be Egyptian school of thought. However, they switch over to a version of Greek democracy with the very rich and elite have a say in government. However, all the rich and elite have a say in government, not a select few of them. And this system does work out for a very long time. The history of the Roman Empire plays out. And then we get to Caesar. Now, Caesar kind of messed a lot of things up overall. He caused a pretty big collapse of the Roman Empire as we know it, or the Roman Republic, I should say, and caused for the Roman Empire to play out. He got granted 10-year dictator, emergency dictator for life, to try to, and because the Senate wanted him to be reliant on, or the Senate wanted Caesar to be reliant on the Senate because they wanted to lower his power. So they basically gave him a lot of power. And when a power comes from a specific source, then it's common by Roman law, at least, that that power cannot be considered. It can take that power away very easily. So the senatorial logic was that if we give Caesar a lot of power now, we can make him so reliant on the Senate that he'll do whatever we say, and he'll basically be a puppet. However, that did not play out. As we know, a lot of senators organized a assassination attempt, and a very large amount, especially for an assassination attempt. And it played off without a hitch. It did work, sadly. It would have been cool to see an alternate history, I will admit. However, we moved on to Augustus. Augustus was a very good strategic leader. However, he was in fact an emperor. Now, this is the part where you should take a note of this. It previously went from a Greek version of democracy to now back to an Egyptian sense of authoritarianism, having an empire. And who chose empire? God, or the gods, since it is Roman mythology. As we see, that does definitely happen here. There is plenty and plenty of sources that lead on to the fact that Rome has its emperors chosen by God. Although they're not really chosen by God, they still are implied that they do. And that is their justification for being an authoritarian government, similar to the original pharaohs mentioned before, and other rulers before that. However, they still wanted to give the illusion of Greek democracy, not Greek tyranny. So, what they did was when someone were to ask in that era, what government are we under? They would say we're under a republic, not an empire. However, historians know that's not true. Back then, the emperors would say that we live under a republic. The reason why was because if you remember, the original first form of government was also an Egyptian-style authoritarianism, with a king, most likely chosen by God, would take control of the kingdom. At the time, it was considered a kingdom. However, they didn't want to give the illusion that they were a king. So they had to come up with the idea of how will we justify it when someone asks the question. So they came up with the very smart and intellectual idea of saying that we still are under a republic, just the circumstances have changed just a tiny bit. And that did the trick. It did definitely work. So although it seems like a pretty simple idea, it did work out without a hitch. It was very efficient. And personally, I think the Roman Empire was most successful under this type of rule, mainly because there was some form of representatives, especially by the governorship, and it was very successful. After we move past the Roman Empire, though, things get pretty interesting. So you see the barbarians roll in, sack of Rome. Now the empire is distraught. You see the switch. Now you have Christianity become, or well, by this point, Christianity is the main religion or the primary religion, and it still believes that the God, now it's just a singular God instead of multiple gods. Now a singular God is choosing who's going to become the next Roman emperor, Western and Eastern. However, I'm going to call the Eastern the Byzantine because I feel like the Byzantine is really showing more of what the Byzantine Empire was actually. It was a much more Greek-oriented religion or empire instead of Roman. And also, its area, it was centered more on Greece. Constantinople at the time was very heavily Greek, not as Roman as we think of it. And another expression, the Romans were more Greek than actual Greeks. However, I think in terms of simplicity's sake, when I'm saying Roman Empire up to this point, I'm referring to the Western Roman Empire. And when I'm saying Byzantine Empire, I'm referring to the Eastern Roman Empire. So we see the collapse of the Roman Empire, yes, the Western Roman Empire. And we see that the Eastern Rome or the Byzantine Empire still considers the process of choosing a ruler because God chose the ruler. While this isn't really true, there's been multiple dynasties that are the ones that choose, but they still have the illusion that fate and destiny is the thing that is choosing the rulers, and destiny is just the tool of, or the mouthpiece, you could say, of God. So we move on to Venice. Now, I don't see that many people talking about Venice because it was a very cool city-state, and it didn't really get much ever more than a city-state. However, I personally think that Venice is a very important and influential city. I'll tell you why. Well, one reason is because of its location. There are barely any cities today that are built on a lagoon or water completely. I know Montezuma with his Tenochtitlan, I am aware. But just focusing on the old world for a second, you won't see any sort of city that has wood pikes in the ground to support every single person in the city. And what do we see? We see Venice be extremely successful. That there are multiple reasons for that, and I will list them all. First of all, the way that Venice is positioned, the lagoon has land barriers that only allow for 3 actual possible ways for boats to go inside. You have 3 is enough for trading, definitely enough for trading. You only really need 1 for trading, but not enough for a full-scale invasion. Because you can only have 1 ship at a time, and if you just have a catapult just positioned in the right way, then you could just constantly keep rolling the same catapult over and over again and destroy the entire armada. Or I know it's not really an armada, but the entire navy at once. Because there's so many choke points that they have to cross. And it's also important because its position, if you're not navally attacking it, then you would have to be ground attacking it. Which means going on Italy, first of all, and there isn't really a real way to get to Venice since it is completely surrounded on water by all angles. which makes it extremely defensible. It makes, if you have walls around that city, then it's basically impossible for any army to have a complete full scale what would be the word? Complete full scale siege of the city in any effective manner without very heavy casualties. Now, those are the territorial and geographical and locational reasons why. However, what I'm going to next episode, though, it will be talking about the government of Venice and how that is efficient. Thank you for listening.